What's up everybody? Today we are going to be tackling a little bit of work on the brake system. So the brake master cylinder and the brake booster. At the previous event, Drift into Plains 1, I ran into a little bit of issues with the brake booster. We're going to try and solve that issue today, whether we remove it or we figure out a different way for the vacuum so I am not losing all vacuum when I am left foot braking through corners. Now most vehicles nowadays do have a brake booster set up in the engine bay for smoother driving on the street. They are typically located directly in front of your driver's seat because your brake pedal is directly below this and activates the pin behind that diaphragm. When we look at the brake master right here, there's only 2 bolts that hold it on to the diaphragm itself, but it is also the section that controls the rear brakes that are basically bolted into the same spot as well. So we're going to disconnect that and leave all the brake lines all attached because I don't want to have to bleed the whole system out if I don't have to just yet. Also, my hydraulic handbrake is ran through where the original stock brake line would be from here. I just have that bent out of the way because I'm never going to use that again. I'm pretty sure in this chassis. I should eventually pull all of this line out of here because it doesn't need to be there, but it's not in the way of anything either. But we are going to disconnect the master cylinder and the rear brake cylinder portion here and kind of just pull it up and out of the way, and then we'll try and get the diaphragm pulled apart. Once we have that stuff out of the way, then I can take a further look at the inside of the diaphragm and where the pedal is in the back to see how the mounting is on this vehicle. I may need to modify how it mounts to the brake pedal itself just to make sure I have the proper amount of pressure on the pedal so that I don't have too firm of a push on the pedal. I want it to be pretty easy to push and still have plenty of pressure on the brakes. So let's grab a couple of wrenches and we'll start taking off that master cylinder from the brake booster and kind of try and just tuck it off to the side a little bit so we can access the actual booster itself. We will have to release the vacuum pressure line at some point if we do actually take the booster box completely off of the firewall. So we got those couple of bolts out of the way. I'm trying to just kind of shake this. Might have to pop this line off of this top portion of the firewall so we have some movement. It's not going to probably move as much as you think because the hard line's kind of in a funky spot here. I really hope I don't have to disconnect all these lines because that would kind of be a bummer. No, it's kind of where we want it. It might just be enough so where we can slip this out of here. So we got it loose, we got a gap in here. Now I'm going to disconnect this vacuum line. Building vacuum in this doesn't take very much. I'm not concerned with taking this off, so we'll do that real quick, and then we'll have to go inside of the vehicle to get to the 4 bolts that are behind this booster. I'll just give you a quick look underneath there. It's very tight, so I'm not really going to be able to film while I'm doing this, but the brake pedal bolts are these 4 in here, and then there's a little pin that holds the actual shaft onto there, so I pulled that out already. That's pretty easy. Getting to the bolts is the difficult part, so I can't really film in here. It's very tight. I'll show you when I have all that stuff out. I got the 4 bolts loosened up behind the firewall here. Now I will try and just kind of shimmy this out if I can so I can get this lifted up and out of here. Aha! There we go. So we got the brake booster diaphragm up on the bench. Now in the comments down below, can somebody tell me why you cannot run this diaphragm without the vacuum line and just leave it all in place? Won't it still work with the shaft that goes through and activates the master? Or is there some other thing that keeps it from activating the brakes? So when I look at this, and you can watch this pin move, when you push this in, it still moves that pin, which leads me to believe that it'll still activate your master, and then this just has to not have any pressure on it both ways, positive or negative, so that the diaphragm inside can still move freely with your pedal. Now when I think about it, and that pin pushing into the master, there is still pressure in that master that will force that pin back up against the pedal, right? Or am I wrong? I might throw this in here and try and just, like right in the garage, press the brake without the vacuum line to make sure that the master cylinder is still actuating. If it's something as just simple as disconnecting the vacuum line, Why wouldn't more people do it? Now, I am not an expert with brake systems, so maybe I am just completely wrong with my idea of disconnecting that vacuum line and just trying it out, but I'm never gonna know if it's actually gonna work if I don't just try it for myself. For my application, it's a Miata, it's a very light car. I don't see that it might be an issue, but I could be very wrong. Well, I got the brake booster and the master back in, but I am not connecting the vacuum line. I do need to find a bolt to plug this real quick so I don't have a massive vacuum leak to the backside of the throttle body. That wouldn't be good either. So now I'm going to plug that vacuum line real quick. I'd already have to move the car over anyways. It's very tight on this driver's side, working underneath that steering wheel. It's very tight. 6'2", trying to go underneath there, not very fun. But well, just moving the car back and forth like that, that's gonna work. For me, I think so anyways. I do need to take it out and actually move at a little bit faster pace, but just that little bit right there, it's a little bit soft right as you start to press on the brake, but then gets nice and firm, and it was kind of squeaking the tires just a smidge. I mean, I think that's gonna be plenty good at, like, you can 100% feel everything in the pedal. A lot better than actually what the booster was. That's just my opinion, just moving it back and forth 5 feet. I will take it for a little bit more longer of a cruise at a little bit higher speeds in a safe manner so that I can actually give you a accurate or more accurate opinion on how that feels just with removing the vacuum line. I think that's gonna work in my case. It's not gonna work for everybody. The next thing I gotta do is run into town and grab some new bolts for the backside of the turbo. The downpipe flange is missing 1 of the 5 bolts. I'm going to grab 10 new ones, 5 to replace currently, and then I have 5 spares for inside of the toolbox when I go to the track. The other thing that was kind of going wrong at the last event, or wasn't really like going wrong, it was just a concern. I don't want my brake master reservoir to start boiling, especially on those really, really hot days. So I do need to put some sort of like exhaust shielding around the downpipe and the turbine housing of the turbo. The brake fluid was getting warm enough to where it was steaming through or around the cap on the brake master reservoir, and that's not good. We don't want that getting super hot and having the brakes fail. That could be a very, very, very bad thing when you are chasing somebody in drift. That being said, I do have some like old license plates that I might be able to shape into place here. I'm just trying to determine whether or not I want to stand them up or turn them sideways and curl them. I want the most coverage out of it. I can potentially like bolt them together or something if I have to. If you stand it up, you'll have a little bit more height to it and keep more heat away from the actual plastic reservoir portion. If you put the shield lower, you're just mainly blocking the heat from like directly pointing at it, and you can kind of shape that around how you need to be able to fit the curvature of the subframe, or not really the subframe, but the engine bay itself. However, I am leaning a little bit more towards standing it up straight like this, and then still adding a little bit of curve to it, so it's kind of right in that radius down there on the frame. And then I'd have to cut a little notch for that brake line that goes down and around the frame down there. There's a little bit of like a hoop-de-doo thing that goes around the frame, and I would just notch this and bolt it over that. Now I believe I should be able to kind of tack weld some little tabs onto this license plate. It is like very thin, like pop can steel, maybe. I'm gonna check it with a magnet. I'm not sure if license plates are aluminum or not. If it's aluminum, I won't be able to do much with it. I'll just have to like bolt a little tab or something onto that and then self-tap it into the frame here. That's all I was gonna do anyways. I wasn't looking to weld anything. If I weld it in, I won't be able to access the bolts on the downpipe. I will need to be able to check those bolts and make sure they are tight at events, basically in between every session, just to make sure they are not backing out, because that messes with my air-fuel ratio gauge, and then it kind of throws me off in the brain when I start seeing my numbers climbing. That's not good. So what I'm gonna do here, because I don't want this to be too tall, I need to keep it below the firewall here. I'm basically gonna take my marker right on top of the cap of the reservoir here and just draw a little line right there, and then I'll take my speed square and slice that right off, because it doesn't need to be protecting above this at all. It just needs to take the heat right there and prevent it from going there. Well, cutting this piece off, answer my question, this is aluminum. I won't be able to weld to it, so I will have to make some little tabs, most likely out of that piece that I just cut off here, so I can bolt this together and then bolt it down into the engine bay. All right, so I have this plate kind of shaped how I want, where I can actually access the bolts right from the side still without having to pull it out. And it should basically block the heat from the downpipe there. I think enough to not melt this thing apart and have this boil. So I'm gonna just drill a couple holes at the bottom of this piece. And I bent up a couple little L bracket pieces that I can just bolt to this, and then we'll have self-tappers that go into the frame down there, right in the bottom. Just two of them, two little self-tappers, nothing crazy. I will pre-drill those because it's kind of tricky to get in there, especially with like a drill for like the self-tappers. It's gonna be difficult. So I'm going to tackle that real quick. I got a couple little dots on here so I can drill those holes and then bolt them to this license plate so we can get it in the car. It's a little bendy, but that might not be a bad thing, because then I can kind of curl it if I want to like protect more like that, maybe. But that's not really important to go that way. It's mainly just protecting the brake master. So I think that's gonna work. Yeah. Now let's just make sure it's going to clear the hood when you shut it. Trimmed it down so hopefully it shouldn't interfere. Oh yeah, it looks like there's plenty of room up there. Yeah, that should be good. Alright, so got this thing in the car. It looks pretty decent. I think it should work pretty well for kind of reflecting some of the heat away from the master reservoir, and that is the main goal of this piece, is to just kind of help with some heat management with the brake system. Something else that I took care of while I had the downpipe off, I did check the compressor wheel. Everything feels good in there. It's always good whenever you have things apart to make sure things actually feel like they're supposed to, not that the compressor wheel is all like shaking all over the place. It's nice and snug with just the right amount of play in there. I also noticed and kind of like felt the wastegate like flap that's inside there, and it was actually loose. So the wastegate is closed right now and it was loose, and I was able to spin it around. That means it's not actually sealing as tight as it should, and I could potentially be missing out on just a smidge of power, especially when I'm below 8 PSI, or right now I have it set at 12. So all I did was take this little turnbuckle piece, took that little snap ring off of there, loosened up this nut, and then I just went a half of a turn in, so it snugged it up quite a bit more. Now there's no play there, and there's no play on the actual little flap on the inside of the compressor housing. So overall, it's pretty minor and simple fixes and adjustments on the brake system and on the turbo. Nothing super crazy, nothing really wild, which is good. Also, the other thing that I did not mention at the racetrack, the new radiator worked amazing. The temp gauge I don't think moved at all the entire weekend, which is phenomenal. Now we'll be able to test a couple more things at the next event, along with no brake booster hooked up, because I'm going to leave that vacuum line off. If it doesn't work for some reason and I just don't like how it feels, I can just slip that vacuum line back onto the booster, and I'll just have a booster setup for the next weekend, and then I will look into getting a proper brake booster delete kit in the future. With that being said, we will end out today's video. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.